Okay, folks. Note 1, colon, S dot res dot 9, comma, 93rd Congress, first session. Emergency power statutes. Provisions of federal law now in effect delegating to the executive extraordinary authority in time of national emergency. November 19th, 1973, ordered to be printed. Now, I want to clarify something for you people. If they have removed all of this, the presidents, including the one in office today, which I could care less one way or another who he is or what he's doing, would not be able to make executive orders because they're outside the constitutional powers that are conferred upon him. That is proof that it's still in effect. Mr. Mathias for Mr. Church, as co-chairman of the Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency, submitted the following report pursuant to Section Resolution 9, 93rd Congress. Introduction. A brief historical sketch on of the origins of emergency powers now in force. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. The problem of how a constitutional democracy reacts to great crises, however, far antedates the Great Depression. As a philosophical issue, its origins reach back to the Greek city-states and the Roman Republic. In the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crises have, from at least the Civil War, in important ways shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. American political theory of emergency government was derived and enlarged from John Locke, the English political philosopher whose thought influenced the authors of the Constitution. Locke argued that the threat of national crisis, unforeseen, sudden, and potentially catastrophic, required the creation of broad executive emergency powers to be exercised by the chief executive in situations where the legislative authority had not provided a means or procedure of remedy. Referring to emergency power in the 14th chapter of his second treatise on civil government as prerogative, Locke suggested that it should be left to the discretion of him that has the executive power, since in some governments the lawmaking power is not always in being and is usually too numerous and so too slow for the dispatch requisite to executions, and because also it is impossible to foresee and so by laws to provide for all accidents and necessities that may concern the public, or make such laws as will do no harm, if they are executed with an inflexible rigor on all occasions and upon all persons that may come in their way. Therefore, there is a latitude left to the executive power to do many things of choice which the laws do not prescribe. To what extent the Founding Fathers adhered to this view of the executive role in emergence is much disputed issue. I'm going to shrink my window here for a minute, not to look at the time. I'm just going to express my personal opinion here, and it's only an opinion. Do I think all power should rest in the hands of one person when it possibly could affect the existence of every single individual in the United States? No. Do I think it should be given to Congress and all of those people? No, there's too many. I think what we should do is have one from each branch. Just 3. There would be speed of accommodation of seeing that things are met and dealt with. But it goes back to the separation of powers, which has been bypassed and usurped for countless years now. But hopefully, in my dream world, 3 different branches representing the American people in such times of crisis could make the difference of, let's say, all existence on the planet, as we have enough. And what we don't have, other countries have. If the nukes start flying, we're all done. Let's hope nothing like that ever comes. This series is going to be going under my Defend America First, because these are topics that directly correlate to what the speech givers that I read to you, this is in direct correlation to it. So it's going to be in that playlist. Okay, to what extent the Founding Fathers adhered to the view of the executive role in emergency is a much disputed issue. Whatever the conception of this role, its development in practice has been based largely on the manner in which individual presidents have viewed their office and its functions. Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft argued the proper role of the president, and perhaps their debate best expounds diametrically opposed philosophies of the presidency. In his autobiography, Roosevelt asserted his stewardship theory. My view was that every executive officer was a steward of the people, bound actively and affirmatively to all he could for the people, and not to content himself with the negative merit of keeping his talents undamaged in a napkin. My belief was that it was not only the president's right, but his duty to do anything that the needs of the nation demanded, unless such action was forbidden by the Constitution or by the laws. Under this interpretation of executive power, I did and caused to be done many things not previously done by the President and the heads of departments. I did not usurp power, but I did greatly broaden the use of executive power. In other words, I acted for the common well-being of all our people whenever and whatever measure was necessary, unless prevented by direct constitutional or legislative prohibition. Let me check my time. 7:33, okay. Roosevelt compared this principle of stewardship to what he called the Jackson-Lincoln theory and contrasted it to the theory ascribed to William Howard Taft. Roosevelt's ideas on the limit of presidential authority and responsibility were vigorously disputed by Taft. In lectures on the presidency delivered at Columbia University, there's that name again, Columbia. In 1915 and 1916, Taft responded that the wide field of action that this would give to the executive one can hardly limit. A president can exercise no power which cannot fairly and reasonably be traced to some specific grant of power, and he cautioned that such specific grants must be either in the federal Constitution or in any act of Congress passed in pursuant thereof. There is no undefined residuum of power which he can exercise because it seems to him to be in the public interest. Check my time, and I bet you I'm there pretty close. Okay. In recent years, most scholars have interpreted the Roosevelt-Taft dispute in Roosevelt's favor. In the prevailing academic view, Roosevelt is described as active, expansionist, and strong. The historical reality, in fact, does not afford such a sharp distinction between the actions of these two presidents, or between their analysis of the problem of executive powers. Taft, in his concluding remarks to his Columbia lectures, said, "Executive power is limited, so far as it is possible to limit such a power consistent with that discretion and promptness of action that are essential to preserve the interest of the public in times of emergency or legislative neglect or inaction." Thus, even Taft was disposed to employ emergency power when the need arose, but he did not wish to go beyond his own narrower, conservative conception of what was meant by constitutional and legal bounds. Thus, the dispute was over where those bounds lay rather than the nature of the office itself. Okay, closing this one up.